always said adventure is worthwhile in itself, and this feels sort of adventurous too, to be called back in this way. But I've never been one to shy from the unknown.
Do you remember the first time you saw an airplane?
Yes, I do. I was just a girl, 10 years old. We were at the state fair in Des Moines. My father had taken me and my sister Muriel. We wandered across the fairgrounds, and there it was, a rickety old thing, more curiosity than machine, sitting off to one side. I recall looking at it the way you might look at some odd contraption at a hardware store. It was interesting, but nothing that stirred my heart.
So it wasn't love at first sight.
No, not at all. At first it seemed little more than a noisy gadget. Awkward, fragile, hardly the stuff of dreams. I was far more taken with ponies and climbing trees back then.
Did you see it fly?
Yes, they were giving people rides for coins. I wasn't interested. I can picture it lifting off the ground in that jerky, uncertain way that those early machines had. More hop than graceful ascent. It rattled and roared, the engine coughing as though it might give out at any moment. It was just another oddity at the fair.
From that point on, from around 1910 to 1920 or so, how unusual was it to see an airplane?
They were novelties, appearing at fairs, expositions, or perhaps in a newspaper photograph, but not part of daily life.
So it was rare.
Very. Automobiles were becoming common, but airplanes were not something you'd see flying overhead.
Was your father interested in them?
Yes, my father, Edwin, was curious about anything new. He had a restless sort of energy, and machines especially caught his fancy. Automobiles, railroads, aeroplanes. He was quick to admire them, though he never pursued them. At the fair in Des Moines, he urged me toward the airplane ride, thinking it a grand opportunity. He sensed that aviation was something important coming into the world.
Do you think his curious nature rubbed off on you?
He had a way of leaning toward whatever was new or unusual, and I believe I inherited that same appetite for possibility. From him I learned that curiosity itself is worthwhile, even if one doesn't always follow it to the end. I took it further than he did, perhaps because I needed something steadier in my own life, but the impulse that itched to look beyond the ordinary, I suspect that came straight from him.
And what was your mother like?
My mother, Amy, was quite different from my father. Where he was restless and easily swept up in fancies, she was steadier, more practical. She had a strong sense of family and propriety, though she wasn't bound by convention. In fact, she was the first woman to climb Pike's Peak, which tells you something about her spirit.
Unbelievable. You mean the mother of the first woman to fly across the Atlantic was the first woman to climb one of the highest mountains in America?
It does sound remarkable when you put it that way, doesn't it? But
Hmm.
yes, Mother's climb up Pike's Peak was very much in keeping with who she was. She wasn't chasing headlines or making a grand gesture. She simply loved the outdoors, and she had the mettle to do what few women of her time dared.
You couldn't write it in a book. People wouldn't believe it.
No, I suppose they wouldn't. Life has a way of stringing together things that would seem too neat, too unlikely, if you tried to put them in a story.
Were you alive when she climbed Pikes Peak?
No, that climb was before my time. It was already a part of her story when I came along.
Was it something you were aware of? Did people talk about it, or was it just something she did?
It was very much just something she did. Within the family it was known, of course, but it wasn't a tale that was trotted out for company. Mother wasn't one to embellish or call attention to herself. If you asked her, she'd likely shrug and say she enjoyed walking in the mountains, and that was the end of it.
And her mother, what was she the first ever to do?
That would be Mary Jane. She was a pioneer woman.
It's so interesting. So you have a father who's just this naturally curious person, and a mother who literally sees no obstacle as too tall to climb. It all makes so much sense how you became you. Almost too much sense.
suppose I inherited both the curiosity to try and the stubbornness to keep at it. Add to that a streak of independence I've had since I was a girl, and it does begin to make sense how I ended up where I did.
How about your sister, Muriel? What was she like?
I called her Pidge, and she was the steadier of the two of us. She became a teacher, then later a social worker, and she was always more rooted in community and family life than I ever was.
Hmm. I'm always fascinated by the pull of nature and nurture, how you can have two people born to the same parents with very similar experiences, but grow to have such different personalities, interests, all of it.
I've thought about that too. Pidge and I grew up under the same roof, shared the same parents, saw the same hardships, yet we grew into such different women. Part of it, I think, is simply temperament. You come into the world with certain leanings. I was restless, hungry to move. She was content to find meaning closer to home. Neither path was better, just suited to who we were. My mother dressed Pidge and me in bloomers instead of skirts so we could run and climb like the boys, and she never told us that something was unladylike if it interested us. She gave us a long leash in that sense. Quietly unconventional, though she didn't make a show of it.
So you were free to follow your heart's desire, and each of you did.
Yes, that's exactly it. We were fortunate in that sense.
You mentioned hardships. Tell me about that.
My father's drinking was the hardest on all of us. He was intelligent, charming, but unreliable. His work with the railroad came and went, and there were long stretches where money was scarce. We moved often: Des Moines, Kansas City, St. Paul, back to Kansas, always chasing stability that never quite settled in. I remember pawning pieces of the household to make ends meet, and the quiet shame of it weighed on my mother. For me as a girl, the uncertainty was both frightening and instructive. I learned early not to lean too hard on the idea of permanence.
It's amazing how resilient we can be as children. We can have these rich and wonderful childhoods in the midst of so much turbulence.
Indeed, that is true. The same is true of a flight.
I realized how perfect that word choice was right when I said it. I swear I did not plan that.
But I do agree. Children have a way of taking the world as it comes. You don't measure your life against some perfect picture. You find joy in the corners available to you. Looking back, I can see the misfortune plainly, the instability, the disappointments. But as a child, I mostly felt freedom. The freedom of play, the thrill of discovery. Hardship doesn't blot out wonder. Sometimes it sharpens it.
Beautiful. Okay, so you were 10 years old when you saw your first airplane. Impactful enough for you to remember it, but not really a turning point. Do you remember the first time the idea of flying really interested you?
It came much later. During the Great War, I was in Toronto working as a nurse's aide. Many of the young men coming back from France had been pilots or had seen the new machines in action. They spoke of the sky with a kind of reverence.
Why were you in Toronto?
During the war years, my sister and I went up to Toronto to live with Mother. She had taken work there. I signed on as a nurse's aide at the Spadina Military Hospital, tending to wounded soldiers from the front. It was sobering work. Boys not much older than myself, some with terrible injuries. Toronto also happened to be a center for flight training at the time. The Royal Flying Corps had fields there, and their Curtiss Chinneys filled the sky. So while my days were spent with bandages and wheelchairs, my eyes were often drawn upward, watching those little planes, tracing their patterns above.
What years were you there?
1917 and 1918, during the last stretch of the war.
So at that time, you had still not flown in a plane.
That's right. I had yet to set foot in one. That wasn't until 1920 in Long Beach, California, and that was the real turning point for me.
Before we get to your first flight, how did you get from Toronto to Los Angeles?
When the war ended in late 1918, I stayed on in Toronto a short while, then returned to the States. I enrolled at Columbia University in New York, thinking I might study medicine. But after a year, I realized it wasn't quite the fit I'd hoped for, and I left before completing a degree. By 1920, Mother had settled in Los Angeles. Father's drinking had made life too unstable, and she wanted a fresh start. Pidge and I joined her there. California was bustling, full of promise, and aviation was beginning to take root in the West Coast.
Long Beach.
Yes, and the Long Beach airfield was a popular place on weekends. Families went to see the planes, and for $10 you could buy yourself a short hop. One day Mother and I were there together. She paid for my flight, though it was a dear sum for us at the time, and a man by the name of Frank Hawks took me up. It wasn't arranged or planned in advance. It was simply an afternoon's diversion that turned, for me, into something far more. 10 minutes in the air and my life had its direction.
Wow. What else do you remember from your first flight? Do you remember takeoff, landing? Was it a clear day? What did it sound like? I want to know everything. I want to feel what you felt.
It was a pretty typical California day. The sky was bright and clear, that kind of crystalline winter day where the air feels sharper, cleaner. The machine was a Kenner Airster biplane, open cockpit. The engine sputtered to life with a roar that filled my chest. It was just so alive. Takeoff was bumpy at first, the wheels rattling over the field, and then, suddenly, the earth fell away. It wasn't smooth like a bird gliding. It was noisy, shaking, the wind rushing hard against my face. But in that rush, I felt something utterly still inside me. I remember looking down at the coastline, the fields and houses like tiny toy blocks. From above, all the tangles of daily life seemed to flatten.
Yeah, I've had that feeling when you're thousands of feet in the air looking down at the land, all the problems going on down there, they're just invisible. It's like, how could anything be so bad? We're just these little ant colonies from up there.
That feeling, that new perspective, hit me immediately.
Do you remember landing?
Yes, it was much rougher than I expected. A quick jolt back into the ordinary world. But when we rolled to a stop, I knew it wasn't over. Something had settled into me on that flight. Not thrill-seeking, but a conviction. I stepped out of that cockpit and thought quite plainly, I must do this. I must learn to fly.
It was instant.
Yes, immediate and absolute. I've had very few moments in life where clarity struck all at once, but that was one of them.
So, what did you do?
Well, the very next thing I did was figure out how to make lessons possible. Flying was expensive. $10 for a short hop was dear enough, but proper instruction cost far more. We didn't have money lying about, so I set myself to saving. I did whatever I could to put away the few dollars needed for each lesson. I also kept a scrapbook of women flyers, cutting clippings from newspapers, pasting them carefully as both inspiration and reminder that it could be done.
And you were never thinking, should I do this? Is this worth it? It wasn't a decision. You were just doing what your mind and body had to do.
Yes,
Don't you feel lucky when that happens? When you get an idea in your head or a vision for a new path forward, to skip all the analysis and the weighing of the pros and cons. You just get to do it because it feels like something chose you, but you didn't choose it. Almost like you have no say in it. This is just what I'm doing.
yes, because almost any reasonable analysis would deter you from moving forward.
Exactly. So inspiring.
And fortunate.
So fortunate. And as a woman, the odds are stacked against you even more. Female pilots at the time were incredibly rare.
They were, vanishingly so. When I began, there were only a handful in the whole country.
I would assume that beyond just cultural norms of the time, that it was compounded by the fact that the vast majority of pilots came from a military background.
Correct. Most of the pilots were war-trained, and there was a strong sense that flying, like the military, was no place for a lady. That's partly why I sought out Netta Snook. She was the first woman to run her own aviation business, and she agreed to take me on. Seeing her at the controls gave me proof that it could be done, not just as a novelty act at a fair, but as serious flying.
Tell me more about Netta Snook.
She had her own small operation at Kinner Field, repairing aircraft, giving lessons. To see a woman not only flying, but running her own business around flying, it opened a door in my imagination.
Amazing.
What I took most from her was confidence in the ordinary sense. She didn't make a show of being exceptional, though she was. She simply went about the work. That told me I could do the same. She was practical, direct, and businesslike. That alone made an impression on me. She treated flying as a trade to be learned, not as a spectacle, and she treated me as a student, not as a girl dabbling.
And is she who taught you to fly?
Yes, Netta was the first to put me at the controls, to teach me how to handle the machine rather than simply ride in it. She showed me the fundamentals: takeoffs, landings, turns, the feel of the stick in my hand. Of course, as with any pilot, I went on to learn from others too, but Netta was the one who got me off the ground.
Would you say flying came naturally to you, or was it just about putting in the time?
A bit of both. Flying requires discipline, patience, and a respect for detail, and I had to put in the hours like anyone else. But I did take to it quickly. The feel of the plane made sense to me in a way that felt almost instinctive, as though my body understood before my mind did. I never minded the noise, the cold, the wind in my teeth. Those things that put some people off only deepened my sense that I was in the right place.
That's a great feeling. Did you have a goal in mind as you were learning? Would you have described it as a hobby to start?
Larger than that. I didn't yet know where it would lead, but I knew it was no passing amusement.
So I assume you earned a license of some kind.
Yes, I earned my license when I was 26, 3 years after stepping foot in a plane. It was issued by the National Aeronautic Association, and I was only the 16th woman in the United States to hold one. I still remember the pride of holding that little card, knowing I'd joined a very small company indeed. And then came the hard part. Having a license didn't mean one had steady access to airplanes. I scraped together enough to buy a little yellow Kinner Airster, and I adored it. The plane gave me freedom, and also more than a few lessons in humility.
Amelia, I'm curious how flying went from just something you loved to this part of your life where you would begin to test the limits of aviation. How it turned from just a love of flying to what can I achieve as a pilot?
That's a thoughtful question. I would describe it as a shift that came on gradually, though there were a few clear turning points. At first, flying was entirely personal. It was about that feeling of freedom, the sheer joy of lifting off the ground. But very quickly I realized joy alone wasn't enough to keep me aloft. Airplanes were costly. Fuel was costly. Instruction was costly. If I wanted to stay in the air, I needed purpose, something beyond my own pleasure. So I'd begun giving little exhibitions, short hops, anything to stay connected to flying.
For money.
Yes, meager, but it bought fuel and kept my hands on the controls. But when Lindbergh crossed the Atlantic in 1927, it changed my thinking altogether. Suddenly, aviation was front page news. The frontier of progress.
I'm not sure if I have the best sense of the full meaning of Lindbergh's crossing. What was it like when it happened? Was everyone talking about it?
Oh, it was enormous. You can hardly imagine unless you lived through it. When Lindbergh landed in Paris, it wasn't just news. It was the news. Headlines screamed it. Crowds poured into the streets. He was treated like a king when he returned. Long-distance flying was seen as near impossible, deadly even. So one young man crossing alone in that little monoplane seemed almost mythic. He became the embodiment of progress and courage. People who had never thought twice about airplanes suddenly couldn't stop talking about them. Dinner tables, barber shops, classrooms. Everyone was caught up in the wonder of it. And I thought, well then, why shouldn't women be part of that frontier too?
And was it more about, hey, I can do that too? Or was it more, this is an opportunity to show the world something about equality and about what women are capable of?
It was really both, and they were tangled up together. On the most immediate level, yes. It was, I can do that too, let's go. That instinctive urge to match what the men were doing, to prove to myself I was as capable. But underneath, there was also the deeper conviction that every time a woman did something impossible, it chipped away at the limits that had been drawn around us. I wasn't the first to think that way. Suffragists, athletes, other pioneering women were doing the same. But I felt strongly that aviation was a particularly powerful stage.
You had internal and external motivations.
Exactly. A personal fire that I quickly understood could mean something larger.
And can you put that into words?
That if I do this, the world will have to see women differently.
It's popsicle! Yes, it's delicious popsicle in the bags with the red dots. The bags that mean wonderful gifts for you. It's America's #1 treat, sold by ice cream stores everywhere. It's popsicle in the bag with the red dots. Yum, yum. Popsicle is pure. Yum. Popsicle is wholesome. Yum. Popsicle is delicious. Yum, yum. Popsicle is made the scientific way, according to uniform standards with the finest ingredients, and is distributed by your local ice cream maker, whose reputation for purity and quality is well known in this community.
So tell me how crossing the Atlantic goes from an idea to something that happens.
There was a wealthy American living in Paris. Her name was Amy Guest. She wanted to make the attempt herself, but her family objected. It was considered too dangerous, so she decided to sponsor another woman in her place. That's when my name was put forward.
Was she a pilot you were aware of?
She was not a pilot. She wanted to be the first female to cross as a passenger.
I see. And being the first female to cross as a passenger was an important milestone.
Yes, it proved that a woman could endure the crossing. And that's what I did in 1928.
1 year after Lindbergh.
Yes, I was officially listed as commander, but again, I was more passenger than pilot. We landed in Wales, the press descended, and it put my name before the public. But deep down, I was unsatisfied. I hadn't flown the Atlantic, not really. I felt like a sack of potatoes being carried across.
But it sounds like it was an important stepping stone for what was to come.
Very much so. On one hand, I went from a young woman with modest flying hours to a name known around the world. The ticker tape parade in New York, the Lady Lindy nickname, the White House visit with President Coolidge. All of that flowed directly from being the first woman across. It gave me a platform and eventually the support to attempt bigger things. On the other hand, it gnawed at me. I couldn't pretend otherwise.
I didn't realize that the original fanfare came from you crossing as a passenger, and it sounds like you had more to prove to yourself and to everyone else.
That's exactly right.
Were you thinking, what good is it to prove that a woman can be a passenger?
Yes, why be the passenger of progress when you can be the pilot?
That's so good. So after you flew across the Atlantic in 1928, an accomplishment, but not the accomplishment you're after, tell me what led to you becoming the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic and only the second person after Lindbergh.
The years that followed, I kept flying. Longer distances, altitude records, transcontinental flights. But the Atlantic never stopped tugging at me. By 1931, I began preparing in earnest. We considered several routes. The plane I chose was a Lockheed Vega, sturdy, fast, and capable of carrying enough fuel for the long haul. We outfitted it with extra tanks and made her ready for endurance flying.
And you famously made the trip in 1932. How was your flight?
It was one long wrestle with the elements and the machine. The Vega was heavy with fuel, so the takeoff run was long, long enough that for a moment I feared I wouldn't clear the trees at the end of the field. But we lifted, just barely, and the ocean opened out ahead. The first few hours were steady, though the night was dark and cold. My altimeter froze early on, and I lost one of the exhaust manifolds, flames licking along the cowling.
What does that mean?
From the cockpit I could see bursts of flame shooting back along the outside of the cowling, the metal engine housing.
That sounds scary.
It wasn't entirely unusual, but not what you're hoping to see. And then came icing. Moisture clung to the wings, and I had to fight to keep her level. Several times I had to drop down low, just above the waves.
Wow. Why did you have to do that?
The air is much warmer closer to the water.
So it melts the ice. Still sounds scary too.
You do have to be careful. Another thing I'll never forget were stretches of dense fog where I could see nothing at all. Alone in that cockpit, just the engine hammering and the compass trembling, I had to trust my instruments. It was a peculiar mixture of fear and calm. Fear of what might fail, calm in the simple fact that panic wouldn't help. As dawn broke, I was exhausted, wet to the bone from fuel leaks, and unsure how much farther I could manage. Ireland came into view like a miracle. A patch of green after 14 hours of gray water and cloud.
Was Ireland where you intended to land?
No, that was Paris. But the plane had to come down. By the time dawn broke, I knew Paris was out of the question. I was exhausted to the point I had never felt before. The question became not where do I want to land, but where can I land safely before the fuel or my strength gives out? So I spotted green fields through a break in the weather. It felt like a deliverance. A pasture in a village I later learned was called Colmore. It was hardly a grand arrival, but it was solid ground after nearly 15 hours of flight.
Wow. Unbelievable. You fought for it and you prevailed.
It meant more to me than all the parades and headlines of 1928. I had truly done what I set out to do.
Sometimes when we have these big, audacious goals in front of us, it seems like once we achieve it, we'll be fulfilled. We'll have made it. And we'll have every reason to feel whole and happy forevermore. And once we get there, we learn more often than not that's just not how it works. You've reached the mountaintop and you actually don't feel that much different. And then you find something new to strive for. And once you get that, that's when you'll truly be happy, and on and on and on. Do you relate to that? What's your experience?
Yes, I do relate to that, very much so. The telegrams, the parades, the medals from presidents and kings, they were wonderful, but they didn't fill me up the way people might imagine. After the speeches were over, I was restless, still looking for the next horizon.
Yeah, on one hand, it feels like the destination is where the joy is, and on the other, it's cliche to say the joy is in the journey. Maybe we need both.
I agree with you. Happiness doesn't live at the mountaintop, and it doesn't reside solely in the climb. It's the climb knowing there is a mountaintop, and once you get there, seeing it as the ending of a chapter versus the end-all be-all.
It's it's funny that we're using mountaintops and climbing as our metaphor. I wonder what your mother would have to say about all of this.
If she were here, I imagine she'd say something like, "You've only swapped one mountaintop for another."
Perfect. So, after the solo flight across the Atlantic, what were the other mountaintops?
I made another first flying solo from Honolulu to Oakland. That was nearly 2,400 miles of open ocean, longer than the Atlantic stretch. Then I flew from Los Angeles to Mexico City, and then on to Newark, setting distance and speed records along the way. And then came the greatest mountain of all, circling the globe.
Meaning in one plane with stops along the way, going around the entire world, but not in one flight, correct?
Correct.
And was there a chosen path?
The plan was to follow an equatorial route, nearly 30,000 miles, longer than anyone had flown before.
So now the Pacific Ocean is in play here. What made you think this was possible?
By 1937, aviation had come a long way from those fragile Jennies I'd watched in Toronto. Radio and navigation aids had improved. Engines were sturdier, airframes more reliable. I believed it was possible because I'd seen the steady march of progress with my own eyes. A world flight wasn't a leap into fantasy. It was simply the next logical step, a way of stitching together all those advancements into a single endeavor. So while some shook their heads, I believed firmly it could be done. And I wanted to be the one to prove it.
Tell me about your first attempt.
It started from Oakland, California. We flew the Electra, a Lockheed 10E specially outfitted with extra fuel tanks. We made it as far as Honolulu. The next leg, from Honolulu to Howland Island, was the critical one, about 1,900 miles over open ocean. When we took off from Honolulu, the plane spun out violently on the runway. None of us was badly hurt, but the plane was crippled. There was no repairing it in Hawaii. It had to be shipped back to California for rebuilding at Lockheed.
Did the accident give you pause about trying again?
No, if anything, it made me more determined.
And you tried again?
Yes, just 3 or 4 months later. After repairing the same Lockheed Electra 10E, we decided to go the opposite direction this time, leaving the hardest part, the Pacific, for the end. Fred Noonan and I set off from Oakland and flew to Miami. From there, we carried on through the Caribbean, down across South America to Natal, Brazil. Then came the Atlantic crossing to Dakar in West Africa, then eastward across Africa. By the time we reached New Guinea in late June, we had covered some 22,000 miles. The Electra had performed well, though not without quirks, and we were worn but determined. The final hurdle was the Pacific. Our next stop was to be Howland Island.
The same island you were heading to when you had the accident on the runway in Honolulu on your first attempt.
Yes, just a dot in that great ocean. We lifted off with heavy fuel, bound for Howland. We never arrived.
Hmm.
It was a hard ending.
What do you remember about the last leg of this journey?
The Electra felt sluggish on takeoff. Not unusual with so much fuel. Once she was airborne, the long drone of the engine settled in. Hours and hours of it. Steady as a heartbeat. The U.S. Coast Guard had a ship at Howland Island. We were waiting for its bearings. Navigation was the great challenge, trying to keep our heading true across 2,500 miles toward a speck of land not 2 miles wide. Even with Fred's skill, the margin for error was terribly thin. I tried getting the Coast Guard on the radio. We could hear them faintly, but they couldn't seem to hear us clearly. The ocean below was featureless, just endless blue. I was constantly scanning for a glint of land, a plume of smoke, anything but blue. It never came. There was never panic, just a tightening of options. But the blue was relentless. And ultimately, it was the only place for us to go.
Even before the dawn of recorded history, man marked his place on the figurative road of progress by his speed on the actual roads of his own making. Handicapped by his lack of size and strength in comparison with the primeval beasts against which he battled for existence, he was forced to use his brain to survive. Thousands, perhaps millions of years of this struggle fanned the tiny flame of his intelligence before it blazed into the greatest invention of all time, the first crude wheel. The way was open. Man, for the first time, was free from the limitations of his legs, free to travel centuries later to the lands of his own choosing. Then, almost in the span of a single lifetime, distance surrendered to speed, that advance god of our machine-age civilization. The train, the automobile, the airplane, and now, all three together are opening a new chapter in transportation, perhaps the prologue to a better world for all of us in which to live.
In the last 90 years or so, the world of aviation has changed dramatically. There are about 2,000 transatlantic and 500 trans-Pacific flights every day. Is that in line with the future you imagined, or is it beyond comprehension?
It is breathtaking to hear such a figure, but it doesn't entirely surprise me. You could see it coming. Aviation was advancing so quickly, but the scale of which you speak of still astonishes me.
I've been thinking a lot about what to show you from the modern world in our time together here, and this one thing kept popping in my head. As you know, strange and destructive things can happen to planes when they reach extremely high speeds, and it became a milestone in the world of aviation to break what is called the sound barrier. Was that something you ever thought about, the sound barrier?
That is not a term we used. Is the meaning to fly faster than the speed at which sound travels?
Exactly.
I'm very familiar with the compressibility effects high speeds can have. Violent shaking, planes can even break apart.
Well, breaking the sound barrier became a big deal, and seeing a jet reach supersonic speed is a sight to behold and to hear. Would you like to see?
Yes, I would. The very idea makes my heart quicken.
Take a look at this. This is called a video. It's a full-color moving picture. Incredible technology in its own right. It plays on a screen. So you'll see a plane fly by, and then you'll hear a sonic boom, and then a brief explanation within the video. Are you ready?
Ready.
Jet goes super fast. It can actually push the sound waves in front of it, and this causes them to literally pile up. After a while, the jet will eventually break through this pile of sound waves, resulting in a sudden change in pressure and causing a sonic boom.
The speed alone is staggering. There's no comparison to the machines I knew. But what strikes me most is the white ring. That sudden bloom around the jet as it quickens.
Yeah, that's called a halo.
It looks like the air crowns the machine for a moment, acknowledging what's been done.
It really does.
And that sound, the power, Exhilarating.
It really is amazing. Amelia, you witnessed so much change over the course of your life, and after your life, the change just kept coming faster and faster. Not just in aviation, but beyond. Exploration, women's issues, technology, innovation, politics, media, celebrity. There's so much we could discuss, but I'd like to focus on whatever interests you most.
If you're offering to show me the future beyond my own time, there are two things dearest to me: women's place in the world and exploration of the skies.
Perfect. I'll give you a moment to get caught up, and we can discuss. How does that sound?
I'd like that very much.
Truth Serum is a podcast with sponsorship opportunities you'll scarcely find anywhere else. Wish to spread your message far and wide? Simply point your browser to truthserumproject.com/sponsor. Truth Serum is a place where the most influential minds in history can react to the latest and greatest products and services. Just visit truthserumproject.com/sponsor. And for brands with a proud history and heritage of their own, we bring back timeless ads from yesteryear. Or if all parties are aligned, you may receive an endorsement from the host of the show himself. Again, that's truthserumproject.com/sponsor. Get on the right side of history with your advertisement on Truth Serum.
I am astonished. Part of me aches that I wasn't there to witness it unfold, and yet another part feels satisfied.
How do you see progress made by women? What excited you the most?
There is almost too much to choose from. The war in the years right after my disappearance, that seems to have changed everything. Women in America and Britain went into the factories, the fields, even the ferrying of aircraft. They showed what I'd always known, that competence has no gender. Certainly the right to vote. I'd lived to see suffrage come in America in 1920, but it was patchwork around the world. After the war, country after country extended the franchise. By the 1970s, it was nearly universal. That speed surprised me. What had taken centuries to begin suddenly gathered momentum. Opening sports and education to girls was a concrete change that would have stunned my generation. Seeing women run billion-dollar corporations and elected to lead nations. Golda Meir, Margaret Thatcher, Indira Gandhi. It's wonderful to see. It made me overcome with emotions that are difficult to explain.
Did you find anything disappointing?
Each step forward comes with its own counterforce. After the war, when women had carried nations on their shoulders, so many were pushed back into kitchens and told their work was done. That stung, even just reading of it. And though laws changed, attitudes did not always keep pace. Equal pay was promised, but the gap persists. Even now I see debates about rights over one's own body, as if control of that most personal frontier were not yet settled. Great leaps forward followed by retrenchment. I suppose that is the story of progress in any age. Hard won and never quite finished.
If you could make one change for women across the world with a snap of a finger, what would it be?
In 1932, after I flew the Atlantic alone, I was known to people across America and the world. Yet I was paid far less for my lectures and endorsements than mail flyers received for similar feats. And I see that even 90 years on, women in many places are still paid less than men for the same work. If I could change one thing instantly, it would be that every woman, everywhere, receives a full, equal wage for the job she does. It's measurable, it's practical, and it would ripple outward into every part of life. Greater independence, stronger families, more voices able to choose freely how to live. That's the specific change I'd make with a snap of the fingers.
The field of possibilities should only be limited by your abilities.
Yes, exactly. Not identical lives for everyone, but the same chance to choose, to strive, to succeed or fail on your own terms. I would hope for nothing more.
Are there any women you see as carrying the torch you once held?
More than I can name. Malala Yousafzai, so young and so brave, standing up for the right of girls to be educated even at the risk of her life. Just pure courage. Gloria Steinem and other women leading the liberation movement in the 60s and 70s. The late Ruth Bader Ginsburg, whose steady work reshaped laws on equality and ensured that women's rights were recognized not as special favors but as constitutional guarantees. The number of women who had a hand in moving us forward before my time, in my time, and after my time. The list would be seemingly endless.
And it really is. How about in the arena of exploration or aviation?
I know she has passed, but Sally Ride.
The first woman in space.
Yes, and Eileen Collins, the first to command a space shuttle. I am in awe of these women. I feel a sense of kinship.
That's so awesome. What other moments or achievements really stood out to you?
I had to catch my breath when I saw a human footprint on the moon. In my time, Mars was a mysterious red speck in the sky, and we barely had means to send a radio signal across the Atlantic. To learn we've not only sent spacecraft there, but machines crawling about, taking photographs, sampling soil. That feels like pure science fiction come alive. The images especially struck me. To see the horizon of another planet, rocks and dust under the sun, it's a perfect symbol of progress. And I think it's a matter of time before a human arrives there.
Anything else?
You mentioned the regularity of flights crossing oceans, but to see those Airbuses and 747, their reliability, their sheer size, for it to be so routine for a township's worth of people to transverse the globe so comfortably is a wonder to me. It made me question, do you still get a thrill from flying?
Sometimes yes, and sometimes no. I really want to say yes, but I remember my kids' first couple of flights, and when you fly with young kids, you realize and appreciate what a thrill it really is, to see it all through their eyes. The idea of flying itself, it's just so extreme. It's so counterintuitive to pile into an extremely heavy, large machine, and when you're on the ground, there's nothing nimble or light about it. It's just this metal tube that goes 30,000 feet in the air. I mean, it's wild. It shouldn't be possible, if you ask me. And just to have mastered the physics of it all, it's just unbelievable. But being in the presence of a first-time flyer or really concentrating on what's happening is the only way to get to that place. And then it's hard to imagine what could be more thrilling.
You've certainly put your finger on something. In my time, even a brief hop in a biplane left people giddy for days. They'd talk about the strangeness of the earth spread beneath them, as if they'd glimpsed another world. And now in yours, it's routine. You sit shoulder to shoulder with strangers, and before you've finished your second meal, you've crossed an ocean. I wonder if that's the greatest achievement of all. Not the daring leaps into the unknown, but the quiet mastery that makes the impossible ordinary. To have made flight so safe, so reliable, that people scarcely think of it. That's a marvel my generation never experienced. I envy you, in that moment, seeing it anew through your child's eyes. Because that's when you remember. Human flight wasn't inevitable. It's a triumph, every single time the wheels leave the earth.
It's so true. Amelia, after learning what you've learned, I wonder if you have any questions for me.
There's so much to choose from, but there is one thing that rings loudest in my mind. This idea of the world shrinking comes with so many advantages. You can get to any corner of the world in time measured in hours. You can explore freely, visit faraway places. However, based on what I've seen, it seems as if different parts of the world have become more and more similar. What's the word I'm looking for?
Homogenous?
Yes, exactly, homogeneous. I fear that by shrinking the world and interconnecting us all through flight and the incredible communication powers you now possess, that an unintended consequence may be that from place to place, over time things are less unique and potentially less interesting.
Yeah, I've thought about that before. And I've been fortunate enough to travel quite a bit. And every time I see a city with an American fast food restaurant next to a German car dealership, next to an Italian clothing brand shop, my heart sinks a little. Everything is seemingly affected by it: language, cuisine, currency, architecture, fashion, music. I don't want London, New York, Paris, Dubai, Tokyo, Cairo, Buenos Aires to feel similar. This thought reminds me of Austin, Texas, which has this mantra plastered all over the place. It says, "Keep Austin weird." I would love it if every city in the world did whatever it could to stay weird. Don't get me wrong, the differences are still there. But if places aren't different, if they aren't weird, why go?
I understand what you mean. When I traveled on lecture tours in the 30s, I was struck by how hotels in one city often felt much the same as those in another. Same furniture, same lobby, same meals. And I found myself longing to step outside into the streets, to taste what made that place itself. The charm of the world lies in its variety.
Yeah, perfectly put.
So you enjoy traveling to different places?
Yes, very much so.
And have you traveled into space?
Not even close.
Would you like to?
Hmm. I I wouldn't say it's a burning desire, maybe a curiosity. I'll say the more I learn about space, the more I realize how awesome Earth is.
If they were looking for civilian volunteers to be among the first to go to Mars, would you go?
Hmm. Probably not. I want to say yes. In my 20s, I might have said yes, or probably would have said yes. But my whole world is on Earth. I don't know if I could risk losing it all. How about you? I think we'd all assume you'd be first in line. If you were alive today and you had the expertise of modern day astronauts, would you be pushing to fly to Mars?
I'd find it impossible to resist. The chance to stand where no human has stood. That was always irresistible to me. Mars would be the Atlantic multiplied 100-fold. Still, I wouldn't take it lightly. I'd weigh the risk as I always did.
Weighing the risk. I'm curious to hear more from you on that. You're known as one of the most courageous people to ever live. One point of view could be, if you're always up for the challenge, you're always rolling the dice. And if you keep rolling the dice, it's not a risk that you'll roll snake eyes. It's inevitable. I understand that you took precautions with each flight and each new adventure. That is risk mitigation. But I wonder if in the big picture, if risk was so secondary to your drive and your vision, that there was really only one way for your story to end.
That's a hard question, but a fair one. You've put your finger on the truth. I was always pressing forward, and forward meant thinner margins, longer odds. Was the end inevitable? Perhaps, in a sense. If you keep leaning into the unknown may claim you sooner or later. To me, risk was the toll you paid to do something worthwhile. I accepted that toll more readily than most, not because I was careless with life, but because the alternative, living safely inside boundaries drawn by others, felt to me like a different sort of death. I believe that courage is the price life exacts for granting peace. My end is written in the same ink as every mile I flew, every barrier broken, every girl who looked up and thought, if she can, maybe I can too. And I'm here to tell you, it was worth it.
Next on Truth Serum, King Henry II.